Welcome to Credentialing Chronicles, where we spill the doctor tea hotter than your morning coffee.
And give you the insider scoop in the wild world of credentialing, provider drama, and everything they don't teach you in med school.
I'm Shannen, and she's Nyleen, two credentialing pros with front row seats to all the chaos.
From fraud scandals to burnout breakdowns and why your favorite surgeon might actually be banned from 5 hospitals.
We got the gossip and the practical advice to keep you out of trouble and ahead of the game.
So grab your coffee, your compliance checklist, and maybe a lawyer, and let's get into it.
Welcome to Credentialing Chronicles, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on the world of medical credentialing, exposing the stories, the loopholes, and the shocking realities that most people never hear about. I'm Shannen.
And I'm Nyleen. We're going to start off today by diving into a topic that's not just controversial, but downright alarming. Can and how do doctors accused or even convicted of domestic violence or sexual assault still manage to keep their licenses and practice medicine?
It sounds unbelievable, right? But it happens more than you think. The very people we trust with our health, sometimes our lives, have dark histories that get buried under bureaucratic red tape and ignorance of just not knowing.
So let's get started. What's worse is that patients actually have no idea, right? So even hospitals, credentialing committees, and state medical boards really struggle to keep track of all of these cases.
So, we're going to break it all down. We're going to look at real cases. We're going to expose loopholes in the system and answer the big question. Should doctors be allowed to practice after committing these type of crimes? Should state boards be made to require disclosures or more close supervision?
Yeah, Shannen. So all while filling you guys in into what's actually happening behind the scenes in this wonderful world of credentialing. So Shannen, since this is our first episode, why don't we quickly tell our listeners what we mean by the word credentialing in this instance?
Sure, definitely. Credentialing is handling in-house or outsourced to a CVO. Credentialing is the art of intensely verifying the education and clinical background of a practitioner and presenting all information collected to a credentialing or medical executive committee, so that they get that final approval to the medical staff and actually work. They don't get hired like everybody else does through HR, right, Nyleen?
Right, exactly. Perfect. Great explanation, Shannen. It's a different department that does a different level of scrutiny to doctors besides the HR practice if they are employed. So this process occurs not only at hospitals, but it occurs at surgery centers, medical practices, insurance companies, and these are all regulated by federal agencies and accreditation bodies. But enough of the nuts and bolts of credentialing, because we're going to get into that in detail as we go along here. So let's get into our story of the day.
This episode of Credentialing Chronicles is sponsored by Advanced Quality Compliance and CVO, born out of a passion to clean up credentialing chaos. AQC is woman-owned, NCQA certified, and built to serve both the providers and the organizations with white glove service and unmatched expertise. From the first file to the final audit, they've got your back. Concierge style, no mess, just compliance. Check them out at aqccvo.com.
As a disclaimer, the cases we will be sharing with you are available through public court documentation. We promise we are not sharing any privileged or private information, and we have never personally credentialed these practitioners. We will not release the names of the practitioners, but we will release all those other juicy details.
Exactly. Thanks, Shannen. So let's get to some tea. All right. So we're going to start in the ER. Our favorite adrenaline-seeking practitioners that are constantly in high-pressured situations. Basically, a doctor who's used to constant chaos. So we're going to talk about an ER doctor. Back in 2023 was when he was convicted, but the incident was back in 2022. So he ends up getting 9 months in jail for domestic violence. The police said that he bloodied his partner's face, broke her ribs, pushed her to the ground, strangled her, pulled her hair, and struck her in the torso. So this doctor was a doctor in good standing in this hospital in New Hampshire and had also served as a civilian member of the local emergency response team.
Not the local emergency response team. What happened? Why would he do this to his girlfriend?
Girl, you know what set him off? A text message.
Tell me.
Yes, his girlfriend got a text message while she was showing him her phone, and it was apparently a thread between her and her girlfriend. And she had joked around, and the text was saying basically, oh, let's leave our boyfriends and run away together. Well, apparently he became so enraged at seeing this text message that he decided to then attack her. He punched her, smashed her head, pulled out clumps of her hair, strangled her with her sweatshirt. So he got her topless and was strangling her with the sweatshirt. And then she remembered she had an Alexa. So she says, Alexa, call 911. And sorry for those who have an Alexa. She said, Alexa, call 911. And then he throws Alexa against the wall. What does Alexa have to do with it?
What does Alexa have to do with this? She's just trying to listen to what's going on and provide help. That's insane.
Exactly. So then the struggle continued, right? She was locked out of the house while she was topless, by the way, for a couple of minutes. And then he somehow grew a conscience and was like, I guess my naked girlfriend can't be outside. So he unlocks the door, lets her back in, but then he runs after her. So she runs into the bathroom, locks herself into the bathroom, and calls 911. So the police show up, but she suffered a concussion, broken ribs, a bloody nose, multiple bruises, and chunks of her hair being pulled out of her head.
Nyleen, he pulled out chunks of her hair?
Yeah.
Oh my God, this poor lady. I hope she's okay.
Well, that wasn't the only time, apparently. So this guy had episodes of doing this. So prosecutors became aware that he allegedly had used force against her, but she had never brought charges until February of 2022. She said he apparently gave her a black eye in 2021 and strangled her in 2018. But guess what? She said that he pointed to his status as a doctor and a first responder in the community to make her feel like no matter what she would say, no one would take her word against his. Yeah. Right. So she said that he would constantly remind her, he would constantly remind her oh, nobody's going to believe you because I'm a doctor in the ER and I'm this person in this fashion. You're nobody. So she was at least alive to testify against him today. So thank goodness she survived the attack. But this guy was working in the ER throughout this entire time of this relationship as a doctor in good standing in the ER.
Oh man, that's a lot. And if she had never pressed charges, there'd be nothing on paper that would say this had happened. So no record is actually being, taken of all these incidences that, he had done to her. That is crazy. Right. And all while being in good standing at the ER. Wow.
Right. And it doesn't even stop there. So additionally, guess what? It seems he also had a drinking problem because
he needed one at this point.
Right. Exactly. So while he was out on bail, he got arrested for a DUI. So February, the incident happened, right? He gets arrested, gets out on bail. Then in August, he got arrested for operating under the influence. So at the end of everything, he got 9 months in jail for domestic violence. And then it included 36 months of jail time, suspended for 3 years after his release. So somehow they just all count it together. The point is that he got some jail time, but it wasn't the full 3 years or whatever.
Wow. So of course, really immediately we need to talk about the initial fallout in all the areas, right? The community hears about it. And how do they hear about it, right? The arrest hits the news, anonymous tips start coming out because people start recognizing him. And then really, the social media blows up with the leaked police reports and then also the body cam footage. I mean, so what happens when the hospital leadership actually finds out? And who are are they finding out from? Are they finding out from this leaked footage, or is the practitioner actually coming in the office the next day and saying, hey, I need to update my disclosure questions?
Right. So shout out to doctors. Like, we know you're human.
Yes.
We know you make mistakes. So doctors, if you're listening, please just self-disclose when anything happens. You're better off.
Please do.
Biting the bullet. Yeah, you're better off biting the bullet, going to your chair of your department, your medical staff leadership, and just say, look, guys, this happened. I'll deal with the fallout, because that will protect you in a lot of ways. But you would hope, right, that this would immediately trigger a medical staff leadership meeting to handle the case and at least minimize the fallout that happens within the hospital and within the community.
Yes. And, shout out to the medical staff professionals, right? Like that, you and me that are out there, getting all of this information, dealing with the disclosure, and then actually having to put that, meeting together and present it to the medical staff committee. You'd think a conviction like that would be an automatic career ender, but sometimes it's not. It needs to be presented with the facts to the committee from the practitioner, and they get to decide ultimately, right? Is that how it works? Nyleen, tell me what it's like now in the medical staff offices.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything is handled on a case-by-case basis. And no, not everything is an automatic action. And girl, can I tell you, in this case, he currently still has a valid unrestricted license to practice medicine in the state of New Hampshire with no disciplinary actions listed on the board website.
It says in good standing? No public warning?
Ma'am.
Is that what you're saying?
Nope. Yes, ma'am.
Even with the requirement that he disclosed to the board, this conviction, you'd think it would be disclosed to the public to say that he's had this issue. But no, he's back in the ER like nothing happened, I guess, huh?
Well, right. And the thing is, it doesn't necessarily mean he goes back to that same ER. Remember, this incident was not against a patient. He didn't put technically, right, a patient at harm while he was working in the ER. And just because he has a license, an active license in the state, doesn't necessarily mean he's working in that same ER or even in the same role. He could end up just working as a doctor in the community, open up his own practice, join another group. And actually, after doing some digging, the hospital did actually take away his privileges. Well, at least the privileges ended. We don't know if they were actually taken away or he voluntarily resigned them. But the point is that his privileges ended at that hospital in May of 2022. So the incident happened in February, and by May, he was taken off of staff.
And that sounds about right, that time frame, right? It takes
enough time. Yeah, they got to present it to the committee and they got to do all that.
Everybody's got to talk about it. And that's because, most state boards don't automatically revoke a doctor's license for criminal charges unless it directly involves a patient, right? So that's another thing, to really consider, which means that a doctor could really, truly be convicted of beating their spouse, assaulting a stranger at a bar one night because they've had a little too much to drink, or worse, sexual violence, and literally still legally practice medicine in the state, right? Or go to a new state. What do you think?
Right. So one of the biggest reasons that this happens is because the state medical boards rely on self-reporting. Doctors are expected to tell on themselves that they've been convicted of a crime.
Makes sense. And do they? Surprise, surprise, right? Many don't.
Right. Exactly. And the thing is right. So even when they do, hospitals don't always report disciplinary actions to the NPDB because there's loopholes and we don't want to talk about them because the reality is we should be reporting to the NPDB. The NPDB is the national database that's kind of meant to protect the population and hospitals from hiring and allowing these doctors, these bad actors in medicine to continue practicing. But the reality is this was a private issue, right? It wasn't against a patient. It wasn't a malpractice case. There's a lot of things that we need to talk about as far as what constitutes an automatic reporting to the NPDB. And the reality is that if there were no actions taken against his privileges, then they technically don't even have to report it to the NPDB, because if he went to the medical staff and said, hey, I got in trouble, I know you're going to fire me, I can't work in the ER, so I quit, that means he voluntarily took away his privileges. So was it reported? I don't know. We don't know because the NPDB is only queried when a doctor goes and seeks privileges at another facility. So like I said, we do know that there was some kind of something happening because February he was arrested and May he wasn't part of the medical staff anymore, at least at that facility, right? We don't know where else he had privileges. But curiously, if we run a check, right? So there's websites on there and a lot of them are free because hospitals, medical staff offices are overwhelmed. So we've all gone to this like online database type thing. So if you get that verification site from the hospital and we run his verification, it says that his tenure at that hospital for 10 years says he was working in good standing those 10 years. So if he went to apply somewhere else and there were no checks and balances, so if another facility never ran a background check, they would technically potentially do just a check and say, okay, did you have privileges at this facility? Yes. Okay, how many years? I had it there for 10 years. Okay, let me check your New Hampshire license. Okay, great. So New Hampshire license says he's in good standing and the hospital says he was in good standing. So if they don't do a background check or a Google search, guess what? They'd never even know that the doctor had a record.
Yeah. And the NPDB does have consequences for entities that don't report. But I mean, really, are those being followed? Are they being audited? Because I've never seen NPDB come in and audit the medical staff minutes. Have you ever seen that happen? I haven't seen that happen yet. This part is really unsure.
And with all these federal budget cuts, I'm not sure how much is going to happen.
Yeah, we need to get DOJ to come in and audit the NPDB. So, a doctor with a criminal past can just move to another state, apply for a new license and start fresh because the new board might not even know about their history. I mean, we have a lot of cases that we want to talk to you guys about where exactly these things are happening. And that's why we're bringing them to the front and center.
Right. Correct. So I will tell you, like I said, like we've discussed, that relies on self-reporting because the applications that these doctors fill out, they all are required to have a disclosure question on there on the application to ask whether or not they've been convicted of a crime or not. Now, however, it is up to somebody to verify that what that doctor checked off on that application is either correct or not. Exactly. So if we're in a rush and we're just going to say, oh, he doesn't have a criminal record, he didn't say he had a criminal record, and we just process the file. Yeah. He seems like a nice guy, then guess what? You're never going to find out. So this is why it is such a vital role at our facilities. And it's so important to run background checks and Google searches on anyone that comes to our facilities.
Yeah, we have a client. I forgot to tell you this. We have a client that they have on their checklist Google search. And so we have to run a Google search and print out that first page and show them, what exactly is on that first page of the Google search.
That is such a great idea.
Exactly. So really, when does an arrest affect hospital privileges? Can you really break that down?
Well, there's just too much to consider. So one of the things we're going to consider, right, is it a misdemeanor or a felony? So let me give you an example. Sure. We had a doctor fills out his application says, no, I've never been convicted of anything. I run his background check. I get a flag on the background check. So the flag on the background check was he was on a boat and his underage child did not have their life safety vest on. But because it was a ticket issued by the Coast Guard, it was considered a misdemeanor. So is that going to affect his hospital privileges? Are we going to really say, no, doctor, you're a criminal because your child wasn't wearing their life vest, No,
but I'm going to say, sir, I need you to update these disclosure questions and provide me with 2 sentences.
Absolutely. Which is totally fair. But right. So there's just a lot of things we consider. So we can't really have a black and white answer as to, can that actually affect hospital privileges? And then also, was this a one-time incident or was it part of a larger pattern? Was it a bar fight?
Because doctor, what are we saying?
Right. And he wasn't arrested the last couple of times, but it definitely was a pattern. He'd been abusing her for years. Those are things we would want to consider. And then also we would have to consider, is there substance abuse involved? Is there a mental health issue?
Yes.
And then also were professional boundaries, violated? Did they hurt a patient or not? So there's a lot of things to talk about and consider when we talk about an incident with a doctor.
Yeah, and I guess the MPDB and the reporting requirements are clear, but it's really the question is, are people reporting and doing the process of the self-reporting, and then maybe a little scared, I reported, now what do I do? And again, shout out to the medical staff professionals, because your medical staff professional, and again, let us just put a disclaimer out there. This is not just for doctors. This is for nurse practitioners, APRNs. This is for physician's assistants. This is for your behavioral health professionals. Anybody with an NPI that is a billing provider is really who this is for. We say doctors, it's a default, but it's not just doctors. It's anybody with, the NPI status. And so you just got to make sure that you hang on to your medical staff professional, because they will walk you through the process and they will tell you, what do you need to report? How do you need to report it? What questions on the disclosure questions go along with this? And they'll really help you. I mean, right, Nyleen, what do you think?
Right. And so there are things that are black and white. You have to report if there's a suspension greater than 30 days, if a person's privileges were revoked, or if they were forced, right? If there was any action taken against their privileges. Those are things that have to be reported by the NPDB. And if the NPDB, if the NPDB finds out, yes, you can be sued for this stuff. So the NPDB can take action, and we hope that they report. But we can actually have a whole episode just on the NPDB, but there's a lot of gray areas, right? So we're going to talk more about that as we get to different scenarios as far as what's reportable and what's not, what follows the doctor's record and what's not. But there's like a lot of gray areas. So what happens when a case is dismissed? That's something to think about.
True, right? It comes down to how the medical board and the credentialing committee reacts, right? I mean, ultimately.
Right. Licensing boards actually conduct their own investigations, and everything varies from state to state. So every state has a different way of handling their disciplinary actions. And it depends also on the peer review committees of each hospital, whether or not a hospital has a leadership council meeting set up in their hospital, or do they just have a medical executive and a governing body? And then there's hospital politics involved. Like, what if this ER doctor was the chair of the ER? Like, what if he was the chair of the emergency department? What if he was right? So all of that stuff goes into play when an investigation moves forward at a hospital.
And there's so much that goes into the handling of these situations. My true worry comes from, how do patients have no idea? How can they protect themselves, And is there a way they could do some due diligence? I know we said Google search, right? So what else do you think?
Well, let's be real, right? Most people don't Google their doctors other than to look up the address of the facility before they go see a doctor.
Oh, don't say it, honey.
Right. So even if they do, good luck finding anything, right? They're probably going to find all the great reviews or, where the office is located. But especially in this case, which is why it's such a great case to start with, is an ER doctor. We don't have a choice as to which doctor we see when we go into the ER. Like, my leg is falling off. I'm vomiting. I have diarrhea. I'm having chest pain. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, hold on, don't put an EKG machine on me. I'm going to Google my doctor, right?
Yeah.
Right. So
we don't always real quick.
Right. Well, we don't always have the time. So that's why we rely so much on these departments at the hospital to check these doctors, and not only check them once, right? Remember, we're doing this on an ongoing basis, but we can at least Google somebody of the people we can choose, or you want to try and Google the name of any primary care doctor that's going to offer you long-term care, any specialist, anybody that we're considering to touch us or do surgeries on us. Absolutely check the state board's website. You can check a lot of licenses for free.
Yeah, you're right. It's just sometimes, the state boards are outdated. They make it so difficult to navigate. Sometimes they're even intentionally vague about past infractions while also not requiring reporting within 30 days of the incident. So they're investigating it and where the public doesn't know. And then, even like Mississippi, they make you pay $25 to get on there and verify your provider.
Right.
So if there are some types of mandates, then maybe it would provide some more transparency in the system.
Right. And although most state licensing boards allow you to search, like you said, some of them have a fee. And sometimes, unless they're convicted of a serious felony, they may just remain hidden from public view. And like I said, because a lot of states rely on self-reporting, if the doctor goes ahead and just says, oh, I'm going to relinquish my license, it's just going to show that the license is no longer active. It's not going to tell you why.
It's very true. Yeah, very true.
Right. So this is just one of the many situations that are happening in the medical staff offices around us. As medical staff professionals working with our physician leaders at our facilities, at our hospitals, these are things that we're considering on people who are applying for privileges to work at our hospitals, at our surgery centers, at our medical practices,
And it brings up, the big ethical debate. Should a doctor who committed, something like this, be, I guess, able to practice, be able to come back from that? And, really, again, that's where the medical executive committee, credentialing committee, right? Isn't that what you think?
Right. So do these doctors deserve second chances, right? If they've served their time, they completed their rehab program and kept their record clean, why should they be permanently banned from medicine? Like, was the mistake disclosed in a timely manner?
True.
Are we evaluating personal conduct or professional conduct? Is there a difference? I mean, I don't know. These are things that we have to talk about and consider.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the committee is probably talking about,
Right. And so if they do this stuff, can they be trusted with patients? What do you think?
That's the most important.
Right. So are we going to say that these red flags are never going to go away? We can't ever be rehabilitated. They did one act or whatever. This guy was only convicted for one time, right? Even though he did it 3 or 4, or however many times he had done it against this lady. Is it a one and done type of thing?
Yeah. And really it's on the hand, I think, like you said earlier, is it a pattern or is it a one-time deal, And so that leads to the question of trust and safety. Can a patient trust a doctor with a history of violence? And so especially if you go and you see that it's against a woman or against a child or a vulnerable person, that's, makes it really hard, for the doctor to come back from, I think. And so I think maybe that's why it is so hidden, right?
Right. And let's be honest, the system isn't exactly strict when it comes to tracking these doctors. We're relying on self-reporting, inconsistent background checks, and understaffed medical boards. The doctors, they've already got it down. So there's a lot of malpractice suits. I think most hospitals already know, if there's a malpractice suit, blah, 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 it follows this. Okay, I got to report it. Okay, we're used to tracking that, but are we really tracking this behavior issues that we're seeing, in this case? I don't know.
Yeah. And do second chances even work if no one's actually watching them, right? We have a dwindling medical force and there are less and less doctors. And what happens when there are slim pickings, And so now we don't have a doctor for rural Iowa because that one doctor had to, was taken off the medical board. So it's like, are people really going to report if they need that person working?
Right. That's a great question. A lot to think about, guys. So what do you guys think? Should doctors convicted of these crimes be allowed to keep their licenses? Is there an area of improvement that should be considered?
I think so. It seems we have a lot to discuss on our next episode. Let us know your thoughts. Send us a message at Instagram at Cred Chronicles or email us at credentialingchronicles.com.
And if you want to check your own doctor's background, we're going to drop some links in the show notes and on our Instagram page to help you navigate at least the state medical board sites.
Yes. And at the end of the day, credentialing professionals have to balance fairness, patient safety, and hospital liability. Here is a little look into real life situations they deal with all day. And we just wanted to take you in there and show you and see how they navigate it all. Shout out again to all medical professionals, staff professionals all over the United States.
And doctors are human, but bad decisions can have career-ending consequences. Some recover and some don't. It all depends on how they handle the fallout.
So what do you think? Should an arrest always ruin a doctor's career? And should patients have a place to verify this information more transparently? Let us know. We look forward to hearing from you. Whoo, that was a lot of tea. Who knew doctors had more drama than reality TV?
And if you think that was wild, just wait till next week. We've got more stories, more scandals, and more credentialing chaos coming your way.
Hit that follow button and don't forget, just because they have an MD doesn't mean they have a clean record.
See you next time on Credentialing Chronicles. Stay credentialed, not canceled.